It's very important. There's 4 exposures that the device uses. So there's upper extremities, which you're placed in a position where, like you would absorb impact with your upper extremities. If I were to trip and fall, I would not do this, and I would not do this either. I'd hit the ground and face right at the ground. I'd be about right here with a 120-degree angle in my joint. Same thing with my legs. So there's an upper extremities, lower extremities, for core movement, and then one for the spine. And it stimulates every long bone in the body. Long bones are the only ones susceptible to bone density loss. So you're even increasing the density of bones that are not typically tested in a bone density examination, which is known as a DEXA scan. You had 3 DEXA scans. Anybody else have a DEXA? Just okay. Is it okay? Osteopenic or osteopenic? No, you're good? Okay. So, the way bone density works, you build it in youth, typically. Build it in youth. Somewhere between 20 and 30, you get to peak bone mass. And then the rest of your life, it then diminishes. So, when you build it, it stays around for a considerable amount of time. So, if you can get back to peak bone mass, you may have another 20 years of healthy bone ahead of you. So it's really important when you can build that back up, you end up getting to the point where you have the bones where you did when you were in your 20s and 30s. And that's ultimately the goal. So these 2 pictures right here, this is a woman who was part of the study, and we're looking at her spine. She used bioDensity for a little over a year. She increased her spinal density by 7.7%. So she went from osteoporosis all the way to healthy bone in that year. Now, typically that's unheard of in any respect, in any therapy. So if you look at the osteogenic loading research, by the way, when speaking to your physician, so after you start doing this, you're going to talk to your physician, talk about osteogenic loading. That is how it's discussed in the clinical literature. bioDensity is a brand name. Osteogenic loading is the type of therapy that this is, and they will know what that is. And if they don't, they can find it in clinical literature very easily. But in the publications for osteogenic loading, and I'll read this out loud, Osteoporosis International has published an osteogenic loading specific paper showing bone density gains that are 7% in the hip and 7.7 in the spine for 14 test subjects. The p-value is 0.001, the highest possible level of statistical significance. Statistical, it means it's a huge difference between the start point and the end point. So 7% in the hip and 7.7 in the spine. These results were multiples of what current pharmacological solutions are for bone density. And just by comparison, if you look at some of the clinical trials of some of the bisphosphonate drugs, these results that were achieved in 1 year, none of the clinical trials that have gone for 3 years have achieved such a high level. And of course, there are side effects affiliated with any pharmacological solution, especially bisphosphonates. Those are very well understood and being discussed in clinical literature now, but there are no side effects to the natural response. And that's what bioDensity does. It triggers the natural response for bone regeneration. Everyone who engages in therapy gets a performance report. Now this report shows the metric that we track, which is bone performance, or also known as force production. So how much force can you produce through one kinetic chain? So for example, the woman who you looked at in the picture with 10 times her body weight for her lower extremities, she'd been using it for 2 years before that. So you don't start on day 1 loading 10 times your body weight. it can take maybe a year or a year and a half to get to those very high levels of force. She actually did so well, she owns 4 different centers for bioDensity, and she now treats osteoporosis. So the performance report tracks your progress, so you see where you were at the very beginning, you see the baseline. She's excited. I'm excited too. So you see the baseline, and then you see the continued progress. So you track and measure every time you do it, a metric of bone performance. So for example, what we're looking at in this slide, someone who's starting at a leg press of 600 pounds and then has built to almost 1,500 pounds. That's a tremendous difference in how much force that individual can comfortably load the legs. Does that make sense, everybody? Now the next slide shows the entire chart, and the most important part about the whole chart, big picture, is you're looking at force production on average over the 4 movements, but also compared to the normative data. Now, what I mean by normative data is everyone is compared to others who are just like them. So, when my mother does it, she's compared to women who are 78 years old, or her height, who have done bioDensity as many times as she has. Now, this is an organic database because the device is server-based. It's constantly growing its data in the background. So, no 2 sessions you'll be compared to the same group twice, because it's constantly growing, evolving, moving with incredible data sets. There's 39,000 users of bioDensity worldwide and 500,000 sessions long. So, what questions are there? Did I go over anyone's head? I try to. Yes. Yeah. Great question. The question was, if somebody's young, does it benefit them, or is it just for somebody who has compromised bone density? So, if you get to peak bone density at, let's say, 25 years old, and then it begins to diminish, the typical curve of bone density throughout one's life. If you can make that peak instead of here, if you can make it here, well then there's more time later on when you have healthy bones, so you're less likely to fracture. Now, are you involved in sports? Okay. So, when you're involved in athletic activity, there is a chance that you can fracture. Even with healthy bone, people still fracture. So by building harder bone density and tendons and ligaments, they follow along, you're less likely to injure. So from your perspective, it's exactly the same protocol that others will use, but you're looking at it from an injury prevention standpoint, from a building bone mass to the highest possible degree to protect yourself. And actually, it's the same reason everybody else is doing it. You're just starting at a different place. Yes? Osteopenia. No, it's not a lack of cells. The cells don't disappear from inside the bone. What happens is when a bone cell, an osteoblast, they change their identity as they're created. They start from the beginning of the bone. Let's say we cut a bone like this, we're looking at the middle of the bone. So in the middle, very middle, is where bone cells are created, called osteoblasts. And through their life, they